Around the world every day, there are thousands of pieces of furniture purchased and sold. Could be a store or even some online marketplace. But what if I told you that some of this furniture had a dark history behind it? Today, we're going to be taking a look at furniture with disturbing backstories. It was July of 1702 when Thomas Busby was being hauled from his prison cell in Thirsk to the gallows in nearby Sandhutton, barefoot in shackles. Along the road, townsfolk stood quietly awaiting what was to come. Some curious and some satisfied at the chance of watching the man they believed deserved to die finally get what was coming to him. Most people in this situation would probably be begging for mercy or crying, but not Busby. He was just extremely bitter. When they finally reached the inn that he once owned, he stopped and pointed to a wobbly wooden chair sitting just outside the door. He demanded to sit in it one last time, and the guards let him. So he calmly lowered himself down into the chair, and at first it seemed pretty normal. But then he mumbled something. Anybody who ever sat in that chair again would die. Later that day, Busby would be hanging from the gallows. Now, before any of that, Busby had just been a known drunk and troublemaker in town. He ran a roadside inn that sat at a lonely crossroads, and he lived there with his wife Elizabeth. Her father, Daniel Oddie, absolutely hated Busby, and the feeling was mutual. At some point through all that, things got a bit heated. Some say the two argued over ownership of the inn, while others say that Oddie tried to take Elizabeth away. Either way, one day in the summer of 1702, Oddie vanished. A search party found his body dumped in the woods nearby Sandhutton, and Busby confessed to being the killer, and he was sentenced to die. So now you know the backstory, let's get back to the chair. It remained at the very inn that he had sat at, and that's where the story gets even weirder. Over the next few centuries, people started noticing a strange pattern. During World War II, airmen who sat in the chair before flying out of nearby Skipton-on-Swale never returned. In the 1970s, a builder sat in it during his lunch break and fell to his death later that same afternoon. Another man died in a car crash after drinking at the inn and resting in the chair for a little while. And while the deaths weren't always instant, they didn't stop coming. By then, the legend had grown so strong that the owners of the inn finally had to take action. They donated the chair to the Thirsk Museum, but on one condition: it had to be kept out of reach forever. Today, the chair is bolted high on a wall where nobody can sit in it again, not accidentally or even as a joke. Because we've seen people like to toy around with things like Robert the Doll, and we all know how that's worked out for him. In 1986, Alan and Debbie Tallman bought a secondhand bunk bed from a thrift shop. It looked fine, solid wood, no damage, and their two young children were thrilled to finally have a real bed. They brought it home, set it up in the kids' shared bedroom, and they didn't really think much of it. After all, it is just a bed. But almost immediately, things started to feel off around the house. One of the kids got sick and wouldn't stop crying. There was radios that began turning on by themselves, and at first, they just assumed it was maybe a streak of bad luck or their imaginations. But it soon escalated into something else entirely. The kids began talking about a red-eyed figure that stood in the room at night. One child said the thing stood in the corner, breathing loud and slowly watching him from the shadows. Another time, Debbie heard a voice call her name from the garage, but when she opened the door, it was completely empty. The radio sitting on the shelf suddenly started blasting static. It was just strange. Alan, who didn't believe in ghosts, also started experiencing things too. While working late one night, he walked past the hallway and saw what he swore was a figure pacing back and forth in front of the children's bedroom. He went in and nobody was there, but he did say the room was ice cold. By early 1988, the family was absolutely terrified. Objects were moving on their own and they kept hearing these voices. At one point, a relative who was babysitting also saw the same red-eyed figure standing behind the door. The children were absolutely traumatized, and Alan finally brought in a pastor to bless the home, hoping that it would do something. But it didn't. Alan came home late from work and was hit with a gut feeling to check the garage. As he walked inside, a voice said, "Come here." When he turned, something invisible hurled a board across the room, narrowly missing his head. And that was their breaking point. The Tallmans fled the house and refused to look back. They told friends, neighbors, and eventually the media, but they never once tried to make any money from this story. And that's what made it really stand out. There were no tours or TV deals, just a quiet Midwestern family who'd been absolutely terrified of their own home by something they couldn't explain. Eventually, they destroyed the bunk bed and buried its remains in a landfill. Whatever it was, they weren't taking any chances keeping it around. In 1988, the story made national headlines after being featured on Unsolved Mysteries. The house has since been quiet. New families have moved in without any incidents, but the Tallmans still stand by every word of what they saw and what they lived through. Hey guys, just wanted to chime in here for a moment and say thank you to everybody for their patience while I was getting the new studio set up. We just moved into a new home and we were away for a while, but I'm back now. And I'm so happy to be able to make this stuff for you guys, but yeah, anyway, enough of that. Let's get back to the video. A beautiful mirror hangs in the front halls of the Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana. At first glance, it's just another antique in a house built before the Civil War. But people who visited the plantation swear something's wrong with it. People sometimes see things that aren't there, and sometimes they see handprints, which wouldn't be that abnormal if the handprints weren't on the inside of the mirror. The house was built back in 1796 by General David Bradford, but the story that gave the manor its reputation began decades later, when Clark and Sarah Woodruff moved in with their children. According to the legend, the Woodruffs owned a young enslaved girl named Chloe. Clark was said to be having an affair with her, or at least forcing one, and when he eventually cut her off and banished her from the house, she feared she'd be sent back to the fields. Desperate to stay close, she began eavesdropping. When she was caught with her ear at a keyhole one night, they punished her by cutting off her ear. From that day forward, she covered the scar beneath a green turban. Trying to regain their trust, Chloe later baked a cake for one of the children's birthdays. But she mixed in crushed oleander leaves, maybe thinking a small dose would only make them sick. According to the tale, Sarah and two of her daughters ate it and died not long after. In reality, historical records show that Sarah Woodruff actually died of yellow fever in 1823, and only one of the daughters died young. The rest, as far as anyone could prove, is part of the plantation's growing legend. They say Chloe was hanged by other enslaved people, either out of fear of collective punishment or revenge, and her body was thrown into the Mississippi. Amid the chaos and mourning, one mirror inside the house, the same one that still hangs in the front hall, was supposedly left uncovered. And according to old Southern tradition, that's how spirits become trapped. Visitors have described seeing a woman in a green turban staring back at them, her face just behind the glass of the mirror. Some say child-sized handprints appear out of nowhere and reappear just seconds before being wiped away. Others have said they've seen strange smudges or faint impressions of faces that shift slightly when nobody's near it. So there's lots of weird stuff going on. The plantation has changed hands many times over the years, but the mirror has never been moved. And according to the current owners, no matter how many times they try to clean it, the marks always come back. Maybe it's Chloe, maybe it's the children, or maybe whatever's in that mirror has been there for a very long time and has no intention of ever leaving. In the 1830s, a wealthy Kentucky man named Jacob Cooley ordered an enslaved carpenter known only as Hosea to build a wooden chest. It was meant to hold linens for Cooley's first child, a symbol of new beginnings. Hosea built it by hand, solid mahogany with smooth lines and crystal knobs. But when it was finished, Cooley flew into an absolute rage. Maybe he didn't like how it looked, or how long it took. Maybe he just needed someone to hurt. Either way, he beat Hosea so badly that he died not long after. The other enslaved workers were absolutely furious with what he'd done. One of them, who is believed to be a conjure woman trained in hoodoo, placed a curse on this chest, and she said it would bring death to anybody that ever used it. And it seems to have worked. Cooley's infant son, the one the chest was originally made for, died soon after birth. And over the next century, tragedy followed the chest everywhere. At least 16 deaths now have been tied to it. As a few quick examples, one family member was stabbed to death after storing clothes inside, and another was shot. There was a woman who put her wedding dress in it and then died before the ceremony. And just like Cooley's son, another person also used it to hold baby clothes. Their child didn't make it the rest of the year. Nobody could prove anything, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. By the 1940s, the surviving relatives stopped using it altogether. Virginia Carey Hudson, a descendant of the Cooleys, inherited the chest and kept it sealed. Her own son Stanley had died violently after placing hunting clothes inside. So, desperate to end whatever was going on, she turned to a woman named Sally, an old family maid who practiced conjuration. Sally performed a ritual and sewed protective charms into the chest drawers, but not long after, she too would die unexpectedly. However, her death doesn't seem to have been in vain, as she was the last known death tied to the box. In 1976, Virginia's daughter donated the chest to the Kentucky History Museum in Frankfort, where it's located today, behind glass protected by the same hand-sewn charms. The chair looked ordinary enough, just a worn old rocker tucked in the corner of a quiet house in Brookfield. But if you ask anybody who was there during the summer of 1980, they'll tell you that chair had something weird going on with it. It started with 11-year-old David Glatzel. His family had just moved into a rental home when David began complaining about a shadowy figure that followed him throughout the house, whispering threats that only he could hear. At first, they just chalked it up to stress or nightmares. But then things got worse. David himself became violent. He growled and spoke in different voices, his body contorted in ways that nobody could really explain. He would suddenly scream that the beast was coming, that it was in the room. In a desperate attempt, the Glatzels reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famed paranormal investigators who had worked on the Amityville case just a few years prior. When they came to the house, Lorraine said she saw a dark cloud hovering over the boy. They believed that David was possessed by multiple demonic entities. And during the exorcisms, which there were several of and some that lasted hours, David was often strapped to a bed for his safety. Right next to him sat that wooden rocking chair. That chair was there for everything. Lorraine claimed she saw it move on its own. One time when she was praying, she said it lifted slightly off the ground and rocked violently without anybody touching it. The Warrens said the chair was where it liked to sit, waiting and watching. David's exorcism would later become the basis for The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It, the third film in the Conjuring series. Not long after the exorcism, David's sister's boyfriend, Arn Cheyenne Johnson, allegedly challenged the demon out loud, telling it to leave David and come into him instead. Months later, Arn stabbed his landlord to death and claimed in court that he had been possessed. It became the first US murder trial to use demonic possession as legal defense. The rocking chair was eventually taken to the Warrens Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut, where it was kept among dozens of other allegedly haunted artifacts. Some visitors refused to even stand near it, saying that it gave off this weird feeling of dread. In 2019, just before the release of The Conjuring 3, the chair was reportedly sold to a private collector. But those who believe in what happened say that it should have never left the museum, because chances are whatever was tied to it is still hanging around. That's going to be it for today, guys. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. And if you have any cases you'd like to see covered, please leave them in the comments below. Have a good night. Bye-bye.